You have a minute. What are you building?
We are selling real-time built environment carbon data.
It's a decentralized machine learning platform.
We're not only making the process easier, but also smarter.
That is crazy compelling.
All New York City buildings must reduce carbon 80%.
I think you said a bunch of things that aren't true that you don't need to say.
How does this company go from 0 to a million, 1 to 10, 10 to 50, 50 to 100? And what are the path product points that actually look like to get there?
Welcome, everybody, to the offices of Phragency and to the Feedback Loop. If you have not been before, my name is Sherveen. I'm the founder and CEO of Phragency. We are a venture-backed startup ourselves. We provide Hollywood-style representation to tech talent. What that means is a bunch of career services and job search products aimed at technologists who are doing their thing in their career. And so that's the only showing I really do for Phragency in the moment. But if you are job searching, hiring, we have conversations we can have with you. So find me or my team afterwards. In the Feedback Loop, we've been doing this since, I don't know, earlier this year, March-ish. Who's been before? Raise your hand. All right, kind of like maybe a 20% of the crowd. And then who's pitched on stage? All right, there's one return founder. We usually have more return founders. Some people are afraid, I guess, to come back and see how well other people do. But the fantastic thing about it has been every week we get a batch of startup founders to get up on stage, give their minute pitch, receive feedback. That story you tell in the elevator can just mean so much to your success in those early days. Even if you have a great idea, a great market, some of it just doesn't wind up mattering if you can't succinctly and excellently tell that really early story. And so that's what we try to do with these folks is push them forward in that journey and accelerate kind of that early stage pathway for all of these fantastic, brave founders who get up on stage. Beyond that, though, the other exciting thing about this is every single week I get to welcome a guest judge to add to the feedback loop, as it were. A venture investor, a check writer, someone who puts decision-making on pitches into practice every single day. And I'm super excited to introduce for the first time to the feedback loop, Charley Ma. Welcome. Round of applause for you.
Thank you.
You're someone who I've run into, we're meeting for the first time after, getting you signed up for this, but I've run into you on tech Twitter. I've seen your writing. You've built a micro reputation. I think that's like a good thing. You're in the community in a way that I think is pretty prominent for people who are paying attention. I'll introduce you as an operator turned investor who made their name as a fintech operator and growth person who's now investing as a generalist. Mostly it seems B2B SaaS and fintech and infrastructure.
Yep.
But how do you introduce yourself, Charley?
Yeah, I'll give the little bit of the longer one as it's kind of fun. So born and raised in the Bay Area, ended up going to school on the East Coast. First job out of college was here in New York. Worked at JP Morgan, was doing R&D and payments at JP Morgan. So learned a lot about payments, and that's how I got up and running with payments, but realized that I wasn't building a whole lot there. So I was really lucky. Went out to San Francisco, joined a company called Plaid very early on. I was one of the first business hires for the company, ended up building and scaling a bunch of our go-to-market teams and functions for several years. Moved back to New York in 2018, left Plaid, joined another early stage company here called Ramp in the corporate card space as their first head of growth and built out their growth revenue team. And then most recently, prior to starting the fund, was head of growth at a company called Alloy, also here in New York, in the identity risk infrastructure space. And so the trend line was I always wanted to start a company. Was usually not great at committing to a specific idea in a specific space, but usually just find founders that I thought were way more interesting. That ended up made me joining them. That then turned into angel investing those founders. And then over time, my co-founder, Mai, and I decided that, hey, the company we should start as a venture firm. So that's what we did. We're investing at Sexponent Founders Capital. We're proudly New York City-based fund, investing out of a $75 million fund too, focused on high conviction, low velocity, early stage investing. So I typically look to partner up with just 2 to 3 teams a year at as early as possible.
2 questions for you out of that. One is, it's interesting, this SF New York transition you've done. I'm a big believer that New York's the best city on earth. Is that your conclusion, having been raised in the Bay and been back and forth ever since?
I think it's the best city to live in by far, yes. I think that I think the flavor of tech is very different between the two cities.
How would you define that?
I think frontier tech to me still feels very SF-ish, right? I think that
hard tech,
like OpenAI, I think would not have been started in New York. It makes sense for it to be started in San Francisco. But I do think there's, at least when I remember when I moved back 5-6 years ago, I remember kind of thinking in my mind, I actually moved for personal reasons. My wife at the time my girlfriend, now wife at the time, lived in New York. And so there's a big reason why I moved back was for personal reasons. And I remember thinking, I'm going to take a bit of a step back on my career in tech. I think I'm very happy to see that that is not the case. I think that New York has an extremely vibrant tech and startup ecosystem, but I do think like the flavor and vibe is a little bit different. I think it tends to be more business model orientated. There is a business model more often than not for a lot of companies here, which I am certainly very appreciative of. And I think the mentality around building is a little bit different.
It's interesting, and maybe this will get to some of that too, this question of the other thing that's notable, I think, is your operating career. You've picked 3 canonical fintech companies. The way that I put it, is canonical as in, some of them are still not yet exited in the way they might want to be or things like that, but everyone knows definitely Plaid, definitely Ramp, Alloy. Anyone who knows anything about tech knows Alloy. So I think you've picked 3 companies to join and help grow that have proven something at least. I wonder to you, we're going to talk to very early stage founders about their pitch. Do you see some of like this whole, the pitch is important early stage also impacting later stage? You're at these companies during their journey into becoming kind of quote unquote mainstream, or at least in tech mainstream. How much of the founder being able to tell that succinct story, helping their team tell that succinct story winds up mattering? Or at the point at which it's a Series C company or they raise a growth round, that's no longer the marketing you care about?
I think storytelling is always important, right? Because there's always a specific narrative. And at the end of the day, I think like the number one job for a founder is sales at the end of the day. Even from our side, like we think about our fund as a go-to-market funnel. Like my job is to try to find as many interesting founders as possible. And at the end of the day, provide them capital, right? So at the end of the day, like I am selling my product and our services. And I think at every stage, what you need to sell, what you need to emphasize is a little bit different. But I think pitching and selling, whether you're selling, someone to join the team, whether you're selling investors to provide capital, whether you're actually selling, a prospective client, it all matters a lot.
Those are the 3 things I always tell people that are so important about the pitch at the early stage too. So that perfectly lines up. Well said. Let's maybe get into it. Are we ready to welcome our first founder up? Let's do it with a round of applause as we get this thing started. This is the Feedback Loop. Let's welcome founder number 1. What's your name?
I'm Rachel Lee.
Rachel Lee, nice to meet you. Rachel, you're going to kick us off tonight. Are you ready to give your minute pitch and then get some feedback?
Yeah, let's go.
Awesome. You have a minute. What are you building?
So after working as a data scientist at Spotify and knowing a lot of independent venues and artists, I realized that the live music industry, especially the show booking process, is extremely fragmented and less data-driven decision-making. There's no one centralized place you can find all information about venues, artists, and historical show data. And people have to use their gut instinct to make decisions on which artists should book to optimize ticket sales. So that's why we're building Gemalytics, which is a centralized data platform for live music bookings. Venues and artists can come to our platform, easily search around 20,000 profiles of global venues and try to find their stats about capacity, historical show, and also contact info to directly reach out to book a gig. And more importantly, our predictive algorithms can tell you who's your best match to optimize your show revenues. So we believe that this will be the future of live music booking industry because we're not only making the process easier, but also smarter.
Well done, under a minute too. Good job. Just off the bat, and I hope you don't mind, some of this feedback's going to be a little bit, I think, in your control, not in control. You've got a combination of you talk fast, which I also talk fast. I love when I get to tell someone else that they should slow down.
I talk really fast.
You talk fast too.
Yes.
And it's so a little bit
feedbacks too.
And you're also a little nervous on stage, so that makes sense too. But that's in combination with the accent too. So that's maybe a dangerous thing. So I always recommend founders who have that. A little more practice is required. I constantly try to slow down and I can't. You will find it very difficult as well, I'm sure. But it'll help because in the middle, you have such great detail and I'm fascinated by what you're building, but you don't want anyone to lose some of that along the way where they have to catch up with you afterwards. So just wanted to give you that front. I know.
Really good feedback. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. What do you think from a concept level? Or from a pitch? We'll get into kind of the details, but
I think it makes sense. I'd be curious around, I think you touched upon it a little bit. I'd be curious around who is the kind of end customer that's sort of purchasing the software initially or the platform?
Yeah, it'd be both for venues or artists. And when I say that's more like representatives of them, more like talent buyers or like agents that's responsible for booking the shows. Yeah.
So when you are thinking about that, one of the things that I often think about is who's the in any marketplace, the true customer. So let's say that one of them, you had to shoot the other and you had to save the other one. Who's the one who you think of as if it's going to be either the artist or the venue or the agent. Maybe it's truly, by the way, this third party who you're like facilitating stuff for. But who amongst that has the most incentive alignment to want your product to work?
Exactly. That's a great question. So for any marketplace, there's always one side that maybe the value prop for them will be a stronger. So our quick question, because right now in the live music booking industry, it's actually usually the venues who will be waiting for artist pitches. So they have more decision power on which artist to pick at the end. So right now we're starting to
Really, that's surprising. The venues themselves.
Right, exactly. Like artists are the one to like reach out to pitch, and then venues are you the one that have more options. So like
this feels true for like, obviously this is a curiosity I have about your audience, right? Like that's probably true for the bulk, I guess, of artists, right? Because the volume of shows, the volume of events, and then probably the top 10% of artists get to decide,
Exactly.
or everyone feels privileged to work with them.
Yeah.
So who amongst the artists, whether it's like through the lens of which agents you're working with, but are you targeting this so that the best artists can make those choices, or do they have teams that are already good enough at doing all this analysis, so you're targeting the bulk? What's the decisioning there?
That's a great question. So I would say the target customer for our website is more like independent venues and artists. By saying that, I mean that not at the level of like Taylor Swift. Those kind of artists don't really need help in booking because they know where their fans are. They know can mostly sell the shows. But the target customer for our user, for our product is more like the small to medium sized venues where there are actually a lot of missing opportunities due to the inefficiency about data sharing in the industry. So yeah, small to medium sized artists and venues. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm curious around, is there like an initial like set of customers that you're kind of working with, or kind of where you're at right now in terms of working on the product and customer side?
Yeah, so our initial product, like I mentioned, the value prop for artist side is actually stronger because they're the one lacking information to reach out to that. So right now we have a curated list of 20,000 global venues to allow them to like just come up here and find some performing opportunities and directly reach out to venues and to apply for that. And right now, starting the smallest group we're targeting is the DJs and also more like Latin music artists in New York, just because of the profiles about our early users. But the product will essentially be applied to any kind of genre of artists and anywhere globally.
One of the concerns I'd have about a platform like this, I'm curious actually, Charley, to get your thought first, and then your founder thought. How do you think about something like this, where one of the challenges is these independent folks who might not have as much either longevity or budget? You know, one of the challenges I think in any industry is the independents or the upstarts who most need the SaaS solution or the marketplace solution to solve a set of problems. At the same time, it causes this like, oh, if it's not for the Taylor Swift of the world, some companies have a clear path to getting those enterprise deals and some companies don't. This feels like a place where it's really going to be challenging to get a Taylor Swift to care. Yeah. Does that concern you as an investor? Do you go, as long as the 0 to 50 is good enough, the 50 to 100 we'll figure out later?
Yeah, I have a longer answer to this one. I actually have a pretty relatively specific framework on how I think about quote unquote TAM, right? Because I kind of hate TAM, and TAM generally is always like, here's how big and massive the industry is, and everything's $1 billion.
And for the crowd who might not know, total addressable market. Yes,
total addressable market, and then there's like SAM and whatever. You kind of keep breaking it apart, right? These for us, one of the benchmarks or mental models that I think about for a venture scale business, right, is that venture scale in order to go on a venture scale path, right, I think generally speaking, if you're able to get to 0 to 100 million in revenue, right, with high margins, efficient growth patterns, and do it very, very quickly, like you've built an interesting venture backable business, right? At 100 million in revenue, recurring, et cetera, that business is quite interesting, right? There's a lot of exit paths for that business, and for us, that would be a fund returner, right? Depending on whatever multiple you want to put on that revenue. So then I think a lot about, okay, well, what are the basic components of that market to get to 100 million, right? So if I were to kind of distill that down further, is it, okay, great. If I think a lot about ACVs, right? Average contract values, right? Like on an annual basis, how much money are you making on a per customer basis, right? Start on the very, very high end, right? If you come and pitch, we're like this super big enterprise thing. We're targeting, the Taylor Swifts of the world. And there's 100, 200 of those. Okay, great. For that to be a $100 million business, you need to charge $1 million, right? The sales cycles are also constantly longer, right? Just because it tends to be longer for those type of sales cycles. But like, that's what that market looks like. And do I believe that, okay, great, can you get 100 of these people to pay $1 million, right? On the flip side, if it's kind of very, very more like SMB, okay, great. If it's $1,000 a month, what is the actual LTV of that customer? How recurring is that? And what's the customer acquisition to kind of go into there, right? And what does the sales cycle actually look like? And for me, it's like, that's where I start to kind of care about the like pitch and pitch conversations. Okay, can I actually craft a picture and viewpoint of how does this company go from 0 to a million, 1 to 10, 10 to 50, 50 to 100? And what are the path product points actually look like to get there? And what are the beliefs or opinions that you need to like kind of believe in terms of what is the revenue in a marketplace, right? Whether it's a revenue take rate, what's the recurrency? I think a lot of the questions that I don't mind SMB products. I actually think that I'm an investor in a company called Apollo that does go-to-market software.
Doing very well.
Doing very, very well. They figured out an amazing like PLG motion to acquire those type of customers really, really efficiently, right? There is a lot of churn in SMB historically, and that's where I think a lot of investors do get scared of on SMB products. So like it's a lot of sort of like, how do you think about all those variables that actually creates like a big enduring business that I actually care about pretty early on.
It's so interesting because I think one of the other things I'm realizing as you were talking about this is you mentioned both SaaS and marketplace. And I don't think I cleared up in my head what you are because there's analytics.
I was going to ask about sort of the monetization model and how do you think about that?
Yeah. Which of those two things? Because again, I think in your pitch, maybe the reason I didn't get, and it sounds like we both didn't get sturdy on which one, you have a lot of both in potential.
Totally. So because of like the unique positions on how our value props for venues and artists are different, so right now we're more like charging a monthly subscription fee from artists, like a tool for them to access information. But for venue, because the value prop for them is not to like just to access more information, but more like can we actually help them optimize the rigs in booking shows, so pick the right artists and then optimize the show revenue. So by doing that, we need to build a longer time to build up this databases that can have like better predictive modeling, and then we take a cut from the shows that book their
And that's actually what I was going to ask. So like, do you have the ability to have those analytics and good choices before your marketplace? The marketplace would help people make this choice because they say, everyone sign up so we can know as a venue what sort of crowd you bring in and as an artist who you bring. But if you're doing it as SaaS, you just acquire that data some other way.
Exactly. So data is the key of our product. And right now, we not just creating our first venue databases, we have a lot of good like partnership with like the big brand organizations in the industry to get, we have about 100,000 like show booking data to build that prediction modeling. And we're just serving those personalized recommendations, even just like what venues match the most for any artist, our artist user, but also try to help venue to book their show, like mitigate that risk in booking artists as well. That will keep growing and we'll keep building those partnerships as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think this question of like, so there's in one world I would view as vertical software for venues, right? Where it's, hey, like you're using this wedge product, right? Which is like there's a pitch where I can see, hey, we have an initial wedge product, which is essentially a marketplace using the data we've collected to get these, artists and get more engagement, help you find more bookings, right? Increases revenue and helps you optimize, et cetera. We use that as a wedge to then we want to be, your operating system for managing, shows, optimizing ticket sales, optimizing just like the revenue streams. And there's a lot of interesting opportunities that opens there. That's one pitch, right? Which is, it's a marketplace as a wedge, but the end product is actually, I think, vertical software, right? And so the actual revenue generation factor will probably, I think, on the venue side, potentially, right? And this marketplace could even be a loss leader, right? Where it's like, hey, we're not actually planning to make a huge business. It could be an interesting business, but we're not actually making a plan to a huge business. The whole point is just to get as much volume as cheaply as possible. We're acquiring them in a really efficient manner, right? With whatever distribution tactic. That's one world. The other world is also we are a marketplace. The primary business sort of like money-making machine is actually on this like sort of on the artist side, depending on the artist. And so I think that's one area that I'd be curious around because I do think that it is a multi-pronged approach from a product perspective, right? Which makes it interesting because then the next question I probably have is, okay, great, depending like how much capital would you actually need to like build all of it? And how do you think about sequencing of like the product roadmap and like the ICP that you're focused on? ICP being ideal customer profile.
Yeah, and I'd say like I have the same exact feedback of like I think that clarity would allow, even if you do have both in the approach and you sequence and say here's exactly how it's happening, because to his earlier point is to like, when he was talking about how he thinks about TAM, what Charlie's essentially talking about is how does he think about the sequence of de-risking a bunch of things about a startup over its journey, right? And if I can de-risk enough in sequence, then I might not know what problems we have 6-12 months from now, but I've sequenced enough to understand, well, 6-12 months is short. I might know the next year's worth of bets, but I might be along for the ride with the founder to not be sure what year 5 looks like. And so the more you can be sturdy about the short term, here's how we get to what I think is a vision, then I think people can kind of go, okay, I understand the marketplace dynamic, that's early, and that's going to get us to this vertical SaaS dynamic that's a little later. So just think about that, but it's a super interesting product.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you both.
Yeah, it's interesting. This whole concept of that marketplace versus SaaS, I didn't even think about until you were talking about both dynamics from Tam, and I was like, wait, hold on, I don't remember which one she is, because the pitch has such strong value props actually in both.
In all of them, yes.
And that's, I think, like...
Yeah, because I think the other thing I think about is that, like, candidly, I don't actually grok marketplaces super well.
Yeah.
I think like the supply and demand around a marketplace, to the question that you were asking around, like at some point there's something that drives it, right? With any sort of two-sided marketplaces, and you need to kind of build unique product value props for both sides.
Yeah.
And then the way you think, like the economic models and the go-to-market, even the revenue model is quite different, right? And I have this sort of belief that very early on, I actually think like the best founders that I've been fortunate to partner with do have strong opinions around what is the revenue model look like. They could figure out iterate pricing, but if you're a SaaS product versus a marketplace take rate product, early on, it does change how you think about the product, how you think about hiring, building, scaling.
Because even landing pages change in a marketplace model that has to attract very strongly. Because some marketplaces you can go find one at your supplier demand side really easily and kind of hijack, but most of them have to fight for both.
Yeah.
And so your landing page has to be careful not to offend one or the other, not to show too much of the hand to one or the other.
Yeah.
That is so much less trivial than people expect.
Yeah.
Starting out in a marketplace.
Yeah. And then the other part I think that matters is finding the right, I think if you are a marketplace and explicitly marketplace, like there are VCs that are just like, I just don't understand marketplaces. That's
John
not
Frankel of
an area.
FFVC, who's been a VC on this twice. I wanted to make that joke as soon as you said something about not understanding marketplaces.
Yeah.
He'll get on this stage and he'll just go like, awful businesses as a rule of VCs.
They're hard, generally, if they're very hard.
Well, he'll say VCs just don't know how to do math. That's why they invest in them.
Yeah.
And that's somewhat true about the asset class, perhaps. At least people who don't come from a more financy background.
Yeah.
But by the way, I think all of it goes down to the same thing. There were some really interesting concepts there from an industry perspective.
Agreed, yeah.
So with that, Charley, shall we welcome the second founder to stage?
Cool, let's do it.
Round of applause, second founder up. Hey there.
Hi, my name is Bidhan.
Say it again?
Bidhan.
Bidhan.
N for Nancy. Bidhan.
Bidhan.
Yeah.
Awesome. Bidhan, are you ready to tell us what you're building, get some feedback?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. You have a minute. What are you building?
So I'm building this project called Bagel. It's a decentralized machine learning platform. So our thesis is that open systems built from a shared work of a community have always won over closed ones in the history of tech industry, especially developer tools. Microsoft and Windows, for example, is a good example in the operating systems world. Like they were winning, but now Linux basically runs more than 96% of the servers of the world. There are a lot of other examples like that, like Android, Unity, MySQL, Python, all of them. And AI is in its Windows era at the moment. All the closed systems are winning, and they're doing most of the innovations. Even in the open source ecosystem, the best models are coming from the big players like Meta or Mistral and all of those. But it's inevitable that AI will move towards the community collaboration model, but it needs the right framework for it.
That's a minute. Well, don't worry, we'll talk more, but let's give you a round of applause. I want to know so much more, but can I start by
Go for it.
Fighting a little bit with you, if you don't mind?
No.
Okay, awesome. I think you said a bunch of things that aren't true that you don't need to say. I'll tell you what I don't think is true, and then we can decide whether that's accurate or not. I don't think it's true that open has won over closed in the way that if you just make that statement out loud. You're right, Linux is on a lot of machines, but Microsoft is either number one or number two over the past few months in terms of market cap as a business. They've learned how to monetize their technology extraordinarily effectively. And as an operating system, Windows is closed. They allow a lot of developers to build on the platform, but it's not open in the sense of it's not decentralized. You also said that the best model right now is, might be Mistral or Llama. The best models are the closed source models coming out of Anthropic and OpenAI. Now, I get what your point is, right? Like I'm so in this space, like you can have the honest conversation, I think, with investors that isn't the marketing-y version of this that says, look, like this is open has constantly won because I'm going to want to fight. Like we're going to talk about your building in a sec here, but I don't want my body to already be rejecting what you're going to say.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know if you feel that
No,
before
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I think maybe it could be more precision in language around what do you mean by won? Because I would agree. Like I would, as an investor, I would invest in Microsoft. Like they made a lot of money and they've done very well for themselves monetizing that closed ecosystem. And I generally find that, whether it's open source, open project, one of the areas I do struggle with a lot of open source projects that have a lot of GitHub stars, a lot of traction. It's one thing to have a lot of traction and penetration in the market. It's another thing to make money off of it. And that's always an interesting area of debate, I think, amongst investors too.
But that's where I go to, now I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, can I?
Yeah.
Quickly. So I actually didn't, it probably didn't came through, but I didn't mention the best model are from the open source ones. I said, even in the open source ecosystem, the best models are coming from the big tech, not coming from the community collaboration.
Got it.
That was the point. I guess that didn't.
Like you're saying, like a meta is the one actually supporting a project, totally.
Yeah, exactly. So
versus something that's actually truly ground up. Got it. Okay.
That's a great point. So now that we're past that, let me also give some pitch feedback. We didn't get to what you're building because you were in this story, and I give founders this feedback all the time. Don't let like the setting be too much of the pitch. Obviously, certain startups require a lot more of this. Like, let me justify the world for you before I get to the pitch. But let's say in a 60-second pitch, and most pitches aren't 60 seconds, but in a 60-second pitch, you probably only want to go to second 15 with the setting and then talk about your building. And don't forget, you can go back, right? So like if you do a first 15 seconds of world building, you can go world build some more later on. But tell us what you're building so that we get to the juicy parts.
So I'll just start where it ended, the pitch here. So we're building the framework for the open collaborators to come together and build state-of-the-art models in the open source ecosystem. And there are three things that we're enabling that was missing from the open source ecosystem, which will enable them to build it together. One is monetization. So the contributors can monetize their resources, their models, their data sets. There are platforms like Hugging Face where a lot of people come together, but there's no way for them to monetize their high-quality resources, and that doesn't incentivize them to provide high-quality resources like that. Second, we are solving privacy. Why? Because there's no monetization without privacy. Like Hugging Face doesn't have any privacy-preserving way for contributors to provide their high-quality proprietary data sets or high-quality proprietary models. We are one of the leaders in the privacy-preserving machine learning world, and we are solving it because without privacy, there's no monetization. And the third thing that we're improving is performance. So performance has to be better, 10x better than the closed counterparts for the open systems to win. So we're working towards that. So happy to go into details how we're solving privacy. Like we have figured out how to use this very fancy encryption technology called fully homomorphic encryption, where you can train your models in totally encrypted data sets, and you get the same result on that. So
I just realized, by the way, I want to let Charlie go for like 5 minutes because I've been talking too much in this one. But one more thing, like I was confused as to the privacy segment. I get the first one, the monetization. You'd have to, as a model builder, build another application, website, business to monetize today. So that's a great value prop. The second one, I was confused what you meant by privacy until what you just said. So I think being a little more clear what you mean is, and how you mean it, right? You said training models on encrypted data. So your point is, I might have a data set that would be fantastic for a machine learning team or engineer to work on to build a model, but today I have to give them the actual pure data to train. And you're saying, actually, we make it possible for someone who owns data to encrypt the actual data itself, maybe servicize it, give it to the trainer, who then gets to train their model, but doesn't get to like own this data, resell this data. Is that the...
Exactly.
Make that very explicit, because privacy, I think, was a word that I didn't know I understood as meaning.
Yeah, I was expecting like a blockchain thing at some point. And I was like, oh,
I'm glad there isn't one.
I'm glad there isn't. Yeah, it's good open photography. But
but Charlie, let me pass to you. That's my feedback so far.
Yeah, no, I think I think the quick area of feedback is I think I'm still a little bit lost as to who is the sort of like end user or sort of the end consumer. It sounds like there's multiple parties, right? There's people with training data. So it sounds like there's on one side of the platform, there's with privacy enabling first and monetization tools to allow people to put data onto the platform and provide infrastructure to do, then monetize that. And then the other side, it sounds like there's sort of tooling to enable people to build net new models and train new models on top of that. I didn't quite get the third bit on performance as to how you drive performance. Like as to why would you be better than a llama?
Yeah, I'll quickly go into that. So this is, you can think of it as like a three-sided marketplace where like the developers were fine-tuning models. So one side arm is the base models, one arm is the compute, the GPUs, and the other arm is the data sets. And all of them come together using this encryption mechanism. So one party doesn't reveal their secrets to the other parties because it's a decentralized way that we do. And how we make it better in terms of performance, we do edge compute. So we are working with a lot of data centers who provide the GPUs to our platform for developers to train their models.
Okay.
And they also store the data on their data centers. So if I'm fine-tuning a model, a llama, and I need like 5 batches of data to be fine-tuned within my platform, the platform knows where exactly those 5 batches of data are stored, and we send the workloads exactly there.
Okay.
And that reduces a massive amount of latency like if you're using a platform like AWS, you have to upload these terabytes of data to that. And that's like one of the bigger overheads than actual compute. Like it takes a lot of time. And then you have a model which has like 500 billion parameter. You have to download it, and that takes a lot of time too. So that's how we do it. We do the compute where the data is, and that gives significantly better performance.
Okay. All right. I think I'm still trying to actually
try?
Yeah, go.
So Bagel. Do you mind if I try to pitch him Bagel?
Yeah.
Except I don't want you to be blockchain ever, so don't do that part. So this is the centralized version of Bagel. So the challenge right now, there's an opportunity that we see in open source AI models, and you see it with Facebook, you see it with everything going on in Hugging Face. People clearly want to build these models that aren't coming from OpenAI and Anthropics of the world. We want to help people monetize in that community and to produce faster and more performant models and applied applications. And there are 3 pillars of what Bagel enables that the current platforms like a Hugging Face don't. The first is we're helping model makers monetize what they're building. Today, if you want to monetize a machine learning model that you build, you have to do that off of a platform like Hugging Face. There's no monetization, and so if I have an image generation AI product to sell you, I have to build my own API, or I have to give it to you for free on Hugging Face and find a different way to monetize with you through services. But either way, on Bagel, you can actually turn that into a serviceizable or API-driven model and monetize on day one. The second thing we enable is the other side of training AI models is data. The challenge with buying data or acquiring data as these model trainers is a lot of people don't want to be selling, might not be able to sell, might not have the rights to sell a lot of this data. So we help those data brokers or those data holders encrypt and then sell in a secure manner that's also compliant and legal all of their data to the model trainers who need it best. So that's the second portion of our marketplace on our platform. And the third side is across both of those parties, a lot of people, but especially the people who are buying the models to put into applied use cases, need to put it on the cloud and actually put it into applied use case. That can be expensive. That can be something that requires a lot of DevOps work. We make it one click. And so let's say that you're a buyer who comes on and says, hey, I want this image generation model that's been trained inside of our platform using proprietary data. We put it in, we handle the edge computing for you. As a buyer, that's like 3 clicks for you to get an image generation model off the shelf and into your applied use case. Still a long pitch. Still a lot of moving parts.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, is that accurate?
Okay, interesting. Because the part that I think I was interested about, where does, I guess like on the GPU, because that's not necessarily, like if you're doing edge computing, that sounds like you're using that from a training perspective, not necessarily from a deployment perspective. Or is that from a deployment perspective?
No, it's not from a deployment perspective.
It's not deployment,
Okay.
it's training.
It's from a training perspective.
So it's actually helping the 2 other things I mentioned. So that's even better pitch, by the way. I like that a lot better than the third one being edge compute for applied use case. I got confused in that too. But you see, most of what I did there, again, I think I still had a lot going on in that pitch, but
It wasn't 60 seconds.
it wasn't 60 seconds at all. But I think the thing that you want to simplify for people is, I think you're solving a much simpler problem than you think. As a founder, we often get in our head and we're like, I need to describe how open models and decentralization and the theory of like the internet and Mark Andreessen says X, Y, Z. We get in our heads. Yours is much simpler. We're building open source models in this world already. People are excited about it. But monetization is hard. Selling data that can be used in these models is hard. And cloud training costs are out of control. Our marketplace solves in boom, boom, boom. Don't live so much in like why the world is broken, because it's not that broken actually in terms of like all this stuff, in terms of what broken means. It's more like the world could use something that puts this all together in an elegant way where everyone in that transaction can live on the same platform.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Thank you for sharing, though. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I want to do a little bit of a topic switch with you.
Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot, but you're the fintech man.
Yeah.
Bolt today.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
Okay,
great.
so
All right.
for the crowd, can we do it?
Sure, yeah.
So what Bolt was one click checkout.
Yeah, one-click checkout.
That was
yeah.
what 2020, 2021-ish time frame when
Yeah.
it was also fast.
Yep, fast.
Which
Yep.
also is dead.
Yep.
Stripe has their one-click checkout.
Yep.
Shopify has one-click checkout.
Yeah.
Amazon has one-click checkout.
Yeah.
Bolt winds up doing two controversial things. One is its CEO and as a company decided, we won't get too much into this part, but like to give loans to employees to be able to exercise options.
Yeah.
Bad idea for a variety of
Awful
reasons.
idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the CEO in general just got caught up in a lot of, I don't know if it was secondaries or
Made a lot of money.
made a lot of money, but
Made a
they
lot
didn't
of
wind up
money.
having a lot of revenue.
No.
Even over the past few years, it's been apparently like something 14, 19 million bucks a year.
Yep.
But it's reported today
Yeah.
that they're raising yet again 450 million bucks, I think.
Supposedly. Yes.
Yeah,
I was actually reading.
that's supposed
I was reading. I think there's been some updates to the story.
Okay, let's hear it.
Yeah. So I think Eric Newcomer actually kind of published the actual sort of term sheet in the deals, right? So one, the investors behind it never heard of them. It's some investment bank and some random people. Two, there's a huge pay-to-play structure on it, right? So this is where I think actually understanding some of the venture terms actually do matter, right? Because at the end of the day, you can I can give you I can give you $1, right? And I will value your company at $1 billion. And you can say you raised venture capital money at $1 billion valuation, right?
I will have paper hundreds of millions
You
of
will
dollars.
on paper hundreds of millions of dollars, and your company's now valued at $1 billion because I've arbitrarily decided that you're worth $1 billion, right? But the actual terms is you got no money, right? And actually, I put a lot of other structure in there.
I got $1,
right?
Charlie.
You got $1. You did get $1, and I hope you spend that $1 wisely.
Yeah, well.
So I think the TLDR that I think now it's coming out is like the deal doesn't actually seem very, very real.
It's probably some like
He's also
network or
structured
friend.
apparently, some network or friend. There's a lot of weird org structures of he's also investing in the fund that's investing in the company. Apparently he's going to make $2 million too for him to come back. So somehow he's going to make money off of this.
Again.
And so I think that the headline was completely headline grabbing and completely false.
What do you think about the narrative? Like, it winds up being that it's, a little bit more of a unique niche situation, but a lot of founders, I think, Adam Newman's another good example of this, founders who have not done wrong in the sense that like there are no weird criminal actions in Adam Newman. I don't know, but like there's nothing scandalous in the Adam Newman or the Ryan Breslau cases of the world, but we keep keeping them in our ecosystem. Maybe Breslau less than Adam. Do you think this narrative is something that as an industry we should be paying more attention to? Or is this just a reminder for us of like, hey, when founders do stuff like this, because the industry reacted today. I saw, Twitter was basically going, oh, why is this happening?
I think there's a lot of dumb investment decisions that were made in the last, 4 or 5 years or so during the kind of like this COVID era peak bubble of investing. And I think I'd like to believe that a lot of venture investors have learned from that, but the sad story is probably not. So I think it's just always going to be part of our FOMO always comes back. I think funds are getting larger and larger, right? People want to write funds, and it's crazy. I would hear stories of founders raising dumb amounts of money, taking a lot of secondary off the table, and the company completely going to zero. And the way that the incentive alignment is set within venture, at the end of the day, like a company going to zero, that's the max money amount they lose, right? And I'd rather just no one talk about it, right? And so if anything, there's actually incentivized to not talk about any of these failure modes, right? Because I don't want to be associated with that.
How many people don't know what secondary means? Let's go with do know what secondary means. Let me make it more of like a thing to raise your hand for. Does anyone in the crowd know what a founder taking secondary means? Oh, whoa, okay. One, maybe two. So basically what happens when you see a fundraising announcement, there's two places the money can go. Let's say that Charley decides to give Free Agency $10 million bucks. The $10 million bucks can go into the operating company called Free Agency Inc., and we can spend it on Free Agency things. But the other thing that happens, a founder can decide to take secondary, which means a portion of that, it'll depend on how hot the market is and how hot my company is, can be a secondary sale where part of that 10 million, let's say 2 million of it, is for me and my founder shares. I'll sell some of what I own in the company a little bit more directly for cash rather than, hey, invest and my stock goes up in value. Hey, invest and give me some of that money and I'll give you some of my shares rather than just giving you generic company shares. And that's a way for founders traditionally to take some money off the table, which de-risks the situation. So let's say that maybe your company is doing well, but you started a family, or you might go, oh, I've still got another 5, 10 years that I need to build this company for an IPO. venture investors came up with this model of secondary to say, hey, we want you as a founder to be a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah.
You have so much on the line. All of your wealth is tied up in this story. So here's $1 million, here's $2 million, so that you're a little bit refreshed for the rest of the journey we have together.
And also go for a big swing, right?
Big swing, yeah.
Where another situation we'll talk about is like, hey, you've been on on a ramen diet for the last 10 years building this company. We think it's actually could be a really massive company, but as a result, we think you have a potential to be $1 billion. We don't want you to sell for $100 million, right? For you're our fund returner.
We don't want you to also only set up safe product bets.
Yes, yeah, we want you to go for the big swing because at the end of the day, venture investing is all about power law, where it's at the end of the day, we invest in, say, 15 to 30 companies, and it's really the 1 or 2 companies that exit at very large amounts that drive the vast majority of returns. Base hits are great, selling for $100 million, it's fantastic for the founder. You can make 10, 20, $30 million as a founder, right? From a fund perspective, it's just okay for us.
Or sometimes even actually a failure even at those
numbers.
Yes,
depending upon what valuation came in. So that's also another kind of incentive alignment with the model where it's, hey, you take a little bit of secondary, define how you define a little, could be quite a bit of capital, right? But hey, you now have the aperture to go take a very big swing with this company and create potentially life-changing amounts of money for a lot of people. But what we saw, we typically see in sort of these like high bubble situations, especially for companies where there is a ton of investor demand, where, hey, the company doesn't want to raise additional capital, right? They're like, I'm good with the capital I have. I don't want to dilute further. I don't want to give up more of the company, right, to investors. But if there continue to be investors that are interested, you can do founder secondary. For very hot companies, you also do employee secondary, right? Where, hey, there's early employees that have been at the company for a long time. We'll allow some of those employees to also get some liquidity, not a lot, but a little bit, just to also kind of de-risk their part of the business. But I think what we saw in sort of the peak bubble era of COVID investing, Adam Newman, Ryan Breslow with Bolt, they were taking egregious amounts of secondary, and investors kind of threw, I think, all of that out the window. It used to be
is a famous case.
Very famous case. Yeah,
I think took a lot of money back when COVID was at its peak and remote work was everything, building a remote conferencing toolkit that went to zero almost instantly after we came back from.
But I think he took away, some absurd amount of money.
Like 20 million, maybe
at
more.
least, maybe more. Yeah,
like
maybe more.
I don't want to say it was.
I don't know, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if it was actually more.
Yeah.
And it was a crazy number, and I think I think a lot of investors lost a lot of discipline. We just kind of gave a lot of, like, Adam Newman made, I think, more money in secondary than the actual market cap of WeWork.
Yeah, I believe that's
crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and just as a reminder for everyone, whenever you see a fundraising announcement, you don't know how much of that is secondary, and then we won't get into details of this, but how much of that is debt, not to venture, and that's why always be skeptical. Not always, but often be skeptical of the amount that you see companies raise. It's not exactly what it seems.
100%.
All right, shall we welcome the next founder on stage? Round of applause for founder number 3. Awesome. What's your name?
Najin?
Najin. Are you ready to give us your minute pitch and get some feedback?
Sure. So we are new money. Actually, we are selling real-time built environment carbon data from all small businesses to those consultancies, executed $200 billion government grants to make a green transition.
Got it. Do you have more you want to say? That was very, very short.
Yeah, about us, it's like technically we got 6 customers, like with logistic manufacturers, like getting all those like tax credits and also the better market opportunity. So we're expecting $2.5 million revenue next year.
Okay. Well, short pitch. Let's give you a round of applause. So I think I caught some of it, but again, I tell this to founders very honestly who have an accent. Sometimes some of it gets lost in there. So if you are in pitch environments, practicing some of that is valuable. But so it sounds like you're basically doing something to help people decarbonize and I don't know your monetization angle, but it sounds like some of it involves government grants. What are the mechanics behind all of that? Maybe use a customer as an example.
Exactly. Have you heard about Local 97 by any chance?
No.
So that is actually pioneering law started this year, this May. So like all New York City buildings must reduce carbon 80%.
It's funny, there was a founder who gave a pitch that's probably going to be identical to yours in a lot of ways about this in the EU and SMBs in the EU for some similar legislation that was coming, forcing businesses to do something similar. Super interesting. Tell us more.
So now it's the time for New York City. So like
New York City, so who has to do it?
So building owners.
So landlords are going to be the ones ultimately
either
responsible.
they go to jail jail or they have to pay gazillion penalties. Every 5 years, they have to reduce half of their carbon. And then on top of they have to report the carbon. But current like reporting system is based on Con Edison and usage. So that's from the past year's one. So you cannot actually proactively react on the getting a government grant. So they just decided that, okay, we're going to pay the penalty and raise the rent by that. So like that's the basic their mindset. But like our data platform giving them a real-time like heat map of the entire cities. So showing them, okay, this is your options. Maybe you could change the off-grid or you could actually apply for the government grants so that you could change your entire building energy sources from something new. So like give them a whole like logistic views about like where you can actually extend your the prime of this entire
How are you
climate
measuring
change.
it through aggregate data, or you're going to a landlord particular?
So technically, we actually target for tenants directly because what the disconnection from this law is like they're actually penalize the building owner who is not emitting carbon. So 98% of the building is like occupied by the tenants, and then they're the actually energy user, which is carbon emitter. So but like they don't have access to it, so we are using little plug, so like actually collecting all those carbon data and the climate
Just so you know, you should watch episode 21 of the Feedback Loop on YouTube. And this pitch feels I can introduce you to the founder. But there's a founder, and he's sounds like most of his market is in Europe. He's German. So I think you guys might find some ways to at least be friends because it was very similar. He was going to build IoT into the buildings to do measurement and do exactly this for SMBs in the EU. Now, my question to you, you said something it's to the tenant. So what's the relationship? And I can't remember this part of his conversation. I think in the EU, they might be targeting the businesses, as in the legislation would impact someone leasing this floor, versus it sounds like you're saying in this case, it's going to impact the building. If it's going to impact the building, why are you coming to have a relationship with me? Or how are you going to incentivize me to care?
Exactly. That's how our business model mechanism kicks on. So we incentivize them based on their carbon reductions and also based on their data providing. And then at the same time, we sell all those data and then those like carbon reduction potential to those consultancy dealing with these compliances and all those grant things. So like we actually create another layer.
So if I plug it in, I make money?
Exactly.
Oh, got it. So the
and then we're going to give them a like new money badge system that is like kind of LEED certification. You started your climate journey as a small businesses. So and then we try to give them a like monetization.
Is that only applicable insofar as there are going to be government credits to facilitate that you're going to give me money? Because you're giving me money, you're essentially giving me as a business found money, right? Like is the source of found money for you only limited insofar as the government's going to back that?
So that's like our just literally epicenter of how we started from the New York City. But when it comes to, we just found our like catalytic growth point is when you saturated your sensor and data points up to the city level. And then we actually step up as an entire market analytics on this beyond just like climate compliance
marketplace
companies.
to analytics platform. We were just talking about this with another founder.
So we will be the material words like Google kind of it in terms of like who needs what devices, and then we have like exact location data for this like those like let's say not only just climate tech but all kind of different industries on it. So we are targeting as ourselves and now proudly saying that we pivoted from those prop tech compliance company because we cannot scale on it, but now we could proudly saying as we are the proactive data platform for this next level.
Got it. Okay. And then the actual sort of buyer of the data platform, it sounds like these kind of consultancies, these
starting from
firms.
Exactly. Consultancies who literally like they are plugging the number by hand. So like they love about it. And then they already have the buildings already in it. So that's why we already have like even we are on our first rounds, but we're targeting for 7,000 sensor points, but we're already like saturating 1,000 sensors from their existing portfolio buildings. But at the same time, it's like, we want to target like higher so that faster saturation and give us like literally the multiple layer of the values of the tier one customer, which is like banks and insurance companies. Like they have to reassess entire market based on the carbon factor in, and also those like appliances companies and any analytics who want to train their AIs actually about the real-time data.
Okay, that makes sense. No, I definitely would. I actually thought the second part was actually much more helpful on like the landscape of just even understanding like I didn't know there was this regulation, right? So like having that as like this is the problem statement, right? Like New York, building regulations have to reduce their carbon emission by 80%,
Yes.
right? Most of these buildings don't actually care about it, right?
Ever.
But there are increasingly more and more kind of consulting firms. There's increasingly more and more like banks and FIs that actually need to that care about this data and want to underwrite that, right?
Exactly.
And so the way that we actually like the way that people have historically gotten this data is manually pooling stuff, probably surveying, calling people,
Even faxing.
yeah, faxing stuff in, right? And so what you're building is we want to build a real-time data analytics platform for carbon emission, where we're the unique sort of wedge is targeting the tenant directly.
Exactly.
There's a unique monetization model where you're actually paying them for that data, right? So there's this IoT device, smart sensor that collects all this relevant, new, interesting data. They make money off of that, right? And then what you're paying for, you're basically paying for data,
Yes.
and then you're monetizing off of the platform and the data asset and the workflows you build on
Yes,
top of that.
across every single industry verticals, actually.
Yeah,
So,
got it. Okay,
yeah.
that makes sense.
And it's so much, the way that he framed that using the wedge and saying, hey, here's like the journey of almost subsidizing. And you might make money still on the monetization, you tell us, but like of the plugs. But it's the point is to have a new intake layer that no one else can have. And by the
Exactly.
way, there's like land grab versions of this in your pitch too, because I think if you saturate the New York market with your plugs, getting those plugs to be swapped out at any point might sound crazy, but it's true. Even a plug being on this wall, we started to lease this place earlier this year. I probably would have like not necessarily unplugged something that I thought was interesting looking in the wall. And so there's some moat to that
Yes.
that I think is interesting of you becoming the de facto data broker and analytics platform
Yeah.
somewhat because of how fast you'll use this wedge to grab at it. I'm curious, Charley, from the pitch perspective, what do you want from something like this in terms of timeline? If a wedge is, if you believe in the wedge, what do you tell a founder of like, here's how fast you must go for me to be okay with this version of the bet?
Yeah, I think different investors have very different frameworks around this, right? One of the general frameworks that I sort of believe in is I want the initial wedge to be inherently in itself a very large market. And then I tend to not like what I call domino businesses, where it's okay. Here's like Act One. Act One is we build this wedge product. It gets us to here. If we dominate that market, it gives us the right to go to Act Two, and that's where things get very large and big, right? That's great, but like there's a lot of dependencies and a lot of luck and a lot of sort of timing around that. And so I don't mind actually, here's what Act One looks like, but I do want Act One to be big, right? We're like, hey, if we don't necessarily nail Act One, I don't need to be dependent on Act Two for the company to be large and massive. Like the first act is relevant and interesting enough, and then it's okay, if that gives you a right to win for this like amazing big Act Two, then that's interesting. But I think sometimes I think some VCs do like these sort of domino businesses. I tend to be very basic, and I think the degree of execution ability that you need to execute a domino-like business is just really, really high. And then it needs to be just really, really extremely crisp and clear as to like, what does Act One enable? How do you win? Why do you win? How does it get you to Act Two? What does that look like? When do you go into Act Two, et cetera, and vice versa.
It's a great framework, by the way. I'm curious, that 2.5 million you said in revenue next year, is that coming from Act One or Act Two? Is that coming from
Even
analytics
before
contracts?
Act, actually.
Okay, yeah.
So,
Those are
because we
service
set up
agreements then?
yeah, exactly. So our raise is 1.5 million, and then we are halfway done, and then we are targeting for 7,000 sensors for those most carbon sensitive neighborhoods, so that we can make a $1 million sales. But even before that, those people who are like in dire need of actually validate their data for like getting a government grant reach out to us.
And they
So,
just want to buy, do they want to buy the sensors directly, or are they buying a service contract from you?
Yeah, so they want to buy the service contracts, and also they're interested in actually purchasing like everything. So we're actually making our first business model with the
Great when the
pre-
customers are
Yeah,
pulling
great.
the
Yeah, that's
product
great.
out of you.
Yeah.
Literally, like, so we were working on pre-sales contracts about like how we could actually design ourselves. So like instead of having typical financial, like, project financial like things, financing things, maybe you could have a recurring like, the business models, including our hardware and services on it. So like that's where we are. And then yes, in terms of the like stage one is like literally 7,000 sensor for Chelsea, Tribeca, and Soho. We could saturate it on that, and then so that we could.
How did these businesses find you?
So like
Or
through
is it landlords or businesses in this preface.
Exactly. So like, yeah, we hustle a lot, and also like we are part of the NYCDC Founder Fellowship, and then we are the part of the New Lab, which is like I'll say, like Planet, the Captain Planet troops for the all climate tech cohorts on them. So like through their network, like we talk about the grants, and then we talk about like who's needed on it. So and then they just like
And they realize I need this now.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Because like current like data points into in terms of granularity, so building level or floor level, not the like literally unit or every single details of the devices even level. So like that's the we're the only one.
How are they
providing on it.
distributing the hardware devices into the building? Do they like own the buildings, or is the building like have a mandate to go green, and so they're kind of pushing the hardware to the tenants, or how does that work?
So
right
like that's a little bit separate. So for our first 6 customers, they're manufacturers and logistics. So like they're directly they have ownership of their
Yeah.
properties.
Their own building.
Yes.
And
Right.
then
Okay.
they're the one. So like
now?
literally.
Yeah, so they're tracking everything.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
And then they got the money directly from the government.
Yeah.
And then but like our like the main business on it is like definitely we just target.
You have
for
to have this as part of your pitch. The end of your even 60-second pitch has to be,
Oh.
our product is so compelling. You have to understand how immediate it is. That there are landlords who are also their own tenants in manufacturing who want this tomorrow already. And when they've heard about us through the grapevine, we've had to give them $2.5 million worth of services contracts because they can install the units on their own, inside their own floors, and get started tomorrow before we're even ready to provide it. That's how you close your pitch, because that is crazy compelling.
That's mic drop, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's huge.
Yeah.
That is really huge.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on the success, and thanks for sharing.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thank you guys.
Wow.
Yeah. No, that was
That was also
cool.
educational. That's a sign of a good pitch, is you learn about the market,
Yeah.
you learn about it, and it's not confusing. It's, it's there's a lot of good moving parts and incentives there.
Yeah.
Well, this is, for the YouTube crowd of this is the first 3 founders. We're going to do a first set of takeaways before we do our next several. So Charley, you've heard 3 pitches here. If you had to give a takeaway, what is it from hearing the first 3 founders go?
Yeah, I think they're all building really, really interesting businesses. I think the tough part with the minute is how do you just almost like simplify and just dumb down the company? Because I think oftentimes for a lot of founders, it's like there's so much that they know, right? They are 100% the expert. They've been assessed about the problem, the statement, the solution for many, many years potentially, right? But in 1 minute, it's how do you almost like dumb down the business so that I just quickly grok and understand this is what you do, right? This is why sometimes I think the YC model of like we are X for Y, right? It's super dumb and it probably dumps down business way too much, but it just helps give an initial framing on like almost like a grounding of how do I think about the business, right? Like, are you a marketplace? Are you a SaaS platform? Are you a data analytics kind of platform? Are you open source? Are you a model training? Like, what is it? Just so when I start having questions, I don't have to spend the first 10, 20 minutes sort of wandering, figuring out where to place you in my mind around what type of business model you are, what you're building for. And I think just kind of trying to think about how to give the framing around that and just simplifying it down really, really well.
Well, I'll add to that and say, from that takeaway perspective, you were talking to 2 of these businesses about how their wedge led to then the next phase of their business. And you did a much better job at that because I think you went with that chronology.
Yeah.
You described something as a wedge. You described how that wedge led to something next. A lot of founders, I think, go more top down rather than chronology. Instead of saying, here's the wedge that leads to this, they go, here's the problem. Here's all the things that are solvable and interesting about that problem and all the things we're building.
Yeah.
And when you go top down, it's like, I've got to follow too many top down threads.
Yeah.
Versus the chronology, it's like, here's the thing that I'm going to say to justify the next thing I'm going to say to justify the next thing I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So I think that chronological pitching is almost always the right way to go.
Yeah.
With that, Charley, thank you very much for the insights on episode 25. Room, help me with this fake close of part 1 here. Let's do a round of applause. Episode 25.